So our theme over the past few weeks has been growing disciples, doing, giving, and living. A few weeks back, I did a passage. It's at the end of the Gospel of John, chapter 21. Jesus has resurrected, and he's on the beach, and the disciples have gone back to what they know. They've gone back to fishing, and Jesus is so gracious in giving them a meal. And he pulls our good friend Peter to the side and says, "Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know I love you. Feed my sheep." "Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know I love you. Tend my sheep." "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter was embarrassed and said, "Lord, you know everything. You know I love you." And I think Jesus' point was, hey, if you're going to say you love me, if you really mean it, if you really mean it down deep in here, then Peter, back it up with your actions. And wow, after that moment, Peter moving from a place of betrayal to that encounter with Jesus, we know that the church exploded. What a wonderful model of Christ's movement and of the Spirit's moving in this disciple for his life to be changed. So with all that in mind, we're going to take a few steps back to a foot washing that Jesus led. We're in the Gospel of John chapter 13 this time. I'm going to be reading from verse 3 to verse 15. Listen for the Spirit's movement in these words. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table and took off his outer robe and tied a towel around himself. And he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." And Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." And Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." And Simon Peter said to him, "Well, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." And Jesus said to him, "One who is bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you." The word of the Lord. Let us pray. Oh Lord, thanks be to you for the model of serving. Thank you for your Son, who models it so perfectly, so vulnerably. Thank you also that it is moments of deep grace directed towards us, human beings, that actually transforms us, even when we're at our worst. Thank you for your transforming power. And all God's people shall say, What an important moment to hear this text. things blowing up in Charlotte, in Tulsa, our nation anxious about a debate Monday night between presidential candidates, but really anxious about an election and an election season. Anxious about any number of things that are going on in our personal lives that may or may not involve the things I've mentioned. How powerful that this is the story that we are pondering in the midst of this anxious world, anxious nation, anxious state. A model of Jesus giving grace, a model of Jesus giving, a model of Jesus being a servant. That might be our lens with which we look into our world and our larger spaces that we occupy. A model of grace, giving, and servanthood. You know, when we read about a foot washing or the washing of feet in ancient times like this, there are three possibilities of what's going on. Foot washing were about hygiene. Folks got dirty on dirty roads, and so they needed to clean themselves up, and almost immediately tied to that, number two is the gift of hospitality. When you went into a friend or a stranger or a neighbor's house in those times, often the person who was coming in was given a basin to wash their own feet most of the time. Maybe if it was a more wealthy home, there would be a servant who would participate in that hospitality of washing and cleaning feet on some level. But the third thing when we think about foot washing is the idea of a symbolic ritual. And I think in the case of our story today with Jesus washing the disciples' feet before a meal, all three of those things were going on. But let's cut right to the chase with this story. You see, Jesus must wash the disciples' feet. He's got to do it. And he makes this pretty clear with Peter when Peter's like, wait a minute, this is backwards. We should be doing this for you. You're not going to wash my feet. You're my Lord and teacher. And when we hear Peter speak, by the way, usually he is the voice for all the disciples, okay? So it's not just Peter who gives us fun examples of our own humanity. He's really the voice for all of the disciples. And Jesus quickly says, hey, Peter, if I don't do this for you, you share no part in me. And Jesus is not just trying to be mean. He's saying, look, you've got to experience my grace at your worst, at your dirtiest, at those places that you feel most ashamed. Let me wash your feet. I need to give you that gift. And you need to get it. You need to understand that it's not about you being your best, putting on your Sunday best. It's me coming in at your dirtiest and you receiving this gift. And Peter, when you get that, when all of us get that, when we wake up to that fact that we've been cared for at our worst, that's when we can go out, as Jesus says later in the story, and wash others' feet. Watch each other's feet. Be the servant for others, because we have such a deep understanding of receiving the grace that has been bestowed upon us by Christ, washing our feet at their worst. I walked the Camino de Santiago this summer, the way of St. James, across northern Spain. I stayed in places called albergues, which were basically hostels. And on this journey, I came across one. It was called San Nicolas Hospital de Peregrino. And it was a 13th century old monastery that had been collapsed for years, and they had rebuilt it. And it now was a place where pilgrims like myself could spend the night. It operated on donations, so the donation you would give would pay for the meal for the people the next night. And this one was run by the Brothers of St. James, an Italian group that supported pilgrims on the Camino. And Augustus was the host at this hospital. And Augustus had a beautiful white beard like Phil's beard. It was well trimmed and put together like yours is. Mine's not very well put together, but you're looking good. Augustus looked good, and he welcomed me in his Italian accent. And we spent the afternoon washing our clothes, resting from a long morning walk, journaling. And many of us, there were 8 of us there that night, kept offering to Augustus, can we help you prepare the meal for the night? And Augustus kept saying, no, this is my job. I am here to serve you. And over and over we offered to help, and he insisted that he wanted to serve us. And this 13th century monastery had no electricity, and so as the sun went down, the candles were lit in this beautiful long hall. And he had set the table for dinner, and before dinner he welcomed us up into the chancel area in a semicircle. And he asked us, we had taken our shoes off before we came in, but he asked us to remove our socks. And then one by one, he came around to us and he picked up our foot. He washed it in a basin. He wrapped it in a towel. And then he kissed each of our feet. And then in Italian and in English, he prayed a prayer for us as pilgrims, that we would experience God and be safe along the path. And the 8 of us were so moved by this, we could hardly hold back tears. And we went to the table after our feet had been washed and just sat in silence for the first 10 minutes of the meal. And then the next morning, we were awoken by Augustus' singing voice in the pitch black dark as he walked down from his bed in the upstairs area with a candle. And it was the first candlelight breakfast I've ever had. And then as I got my pack ready and gave Augustus a hug, I tried to get out of my mouth, muchas gracias. But I could hardly speak those words. How beautiful it was for me to place myself in a position of receiving his great gift, of serving me not only dinner, but washing my dirty, filthy feet and blessing me for the path. Friends, we all, as hard as it is for us, here in the South especially, where we love to serve, to allow others to serve us, to give grace to us, for us to be in the position to receive. Because gosh darn it, we need to receive the powerful grace of God at our most dirty places. Because that, when we really get it, will lead us to serve others. Debbie read a very simple passage about Jesus pulling away to pray. But it's very important. It's very important that when we really get that we have received the grace of Christ at our worst, that we too pull away to pray. And really the way I translate that verse that she read is Jesus got away because people were pursuing him left and right so he could worship. So the grace of God leads to worship for us. And worship leads us to go out into the world after we have praised God and thanked God for God's mighty grace through Jesus Christ. We go out in the world and do exactly what Christ petitioned those disciples to do. Now you go out and wash others' feet. It's funny, on the Camino, when we ran out of things to talk about as pilgrims, we'd talk about feet. In all kinds of places. Oh, my feet are horrible. I have 15 blisters. I have 2 blisters. You know, and we get through dinner and you get into these hostels and people would be sitting with each other on the bunks and people's feet looked like war zones. I mean, it was unbelievable. I guess we were just bored enough that we would study each other's feet. Wow, I cannot believe that. Look at that. That is fascinating. Wow. You need to go see a doctor about that. It was funny. But these are the feet that Augustus took in his hand to wash. And really, these are our feet too. These feet covered in blisters, our souls covered in sores, our bodies covered in the wounds of life, our minds covered with disturbing thoughts and shame. And these are the lives that Jesus Christ takes in his hands and wraps them in cloth and kisses them and prays for them and says, you are loved here at this moment. Now receive this grace and go and serve. Thanks be to God.